I'm Jay. How are you guys doing? Good. Thanks for coming out in this sweltering heat. I'll try and keep it brief so we can go into an air-conditioned place. Curiosity, how many know immersive audio or Dolby Atmos? A little bit here and there. Okay. So this is really based around Dolby Atmos and a couple other technologies. And we'll also kind of dive into music mixing a little bit as well, because it's becoming more normal, so to speak. We'll see if it lasts as long as, SACD did or anything like that. And kind of get into should filmmakers, independent filmmakers, depending on budget, actually consider it or not consider it, stick with surround, stick with stereo, those kinds of things. Hi. Oh, hey, Hannah, how are you? So I've been a board member here for 8 years-ish, I think. Also work on the tech side, so I do projection at Redfield, usually, and do a lot of technical consulting for them as well. By trade, I'm a sound engineer. I do sound for film, TV, web, a lot of music, studio stuff, a lot of live concerts as well. Primarily based around the Cape, but I do travel other places as well. And on occasion work with nice people like Manx back there on video. So he's part of a production company called Big Tree down here. So that's primarily what I do on the off season. I do a lot of IT as well, so it kind of merges all together at the same time. So what I'm going to do is go through some of the other technologies that are out there, kind of where surround sound came from and all that pretty quickly, and then we'll dive into immersive stuff. I did not set anything up speaker-wise, as you can see, because there's too much setup for a short period of time. But I was able to actually remotely log into my computer at home, which has Nuendo on it, so I can at least show you what it looks like there, and there's a ton of stuff on the web as well. So let's see where we go here. Like I said, we're going to go a brief history of surround sound and look at the immersive technologies, which includes Dolby Atmos and Auro 3D and augmented reality as well. What today's filmmakers should know, and what they should consider, and why if you want to use it on your projects. What is required for it if you want to use it in the studio, if you want to build a studio of yourself, and also where we're at today with it, because it really constantly changes, because it's still fairly new. Excuse me. It's been around for a little while now, but it's still changing every other month in a way. So we'll go brief history. Back in the 40s, we had Fantasia, and that was, again, immersive in the sense that it was more, when I say immersive, it's actually from anything that's more than stereo. Click, click. Maybe that's me. I'm just going to take that off in case. Anything more than stereo is really immersive. The cost for Disney's Fantasia it was too much to implement all around, so they didn't do it. And then in the 50s came Cinerama and Cinescope, where they did do left, center, right surround, which is just mono, which just means instead of having two speakers in the rear individually sending out a signal of audio, it's just one. You'd have two speakers in the rear, but they're sending out the same signal. So it's just mono from that sense. And then in the 70s came Dolby Stereo, which again were based on the same thing of left, center, and right. LCR across the front if you're looking at me, left, center, and right. And then rear, which is still a mono signal, but they did include noise reduction in the prints at the same time. That's weird. Might be the wireless. Then in the 80s came more fun stuff, expanded it with Dolby SR and THX. Dolby SR gave it a higher dynamic range, still only LCR-S, which is left, center, right surround with a mono surround, but it gave it higher dynamic range, so you'd be able to have dynamic ranges loudest to softest, and you actually gave it a wider range in that spectrum, because in movie playback, they're really dealing with a specific range of audible sound. It's usually 85 decibels when you're in the theater. THX was Tomlinson Holman, who developed that, and it was basically a standardization so that every theater, at least across our United States country, when playing back in a theater, everything was played back. If it's THX certified, then it's probably going to play back true to what was done in the studio itself. So if you come to Woods Hole Film Festival or other festivals that don't have the certified like that, you're going to have ebbs and flows of where it might be too loud or too soft and not sound the way you heard it when it was mixed in a proper theater, if that's where you had yours mixed. Then in the 90s, Dolby Digital was really the big one, because that took those left and right rears and split it up so it was actually discrete left and right channels plus low frequency effects. And the 0.1 of 5.1 or 7.1 is your low frequency channel. So even though it's a subwoofer, the main speakers are supposed to play back full range anyways, and then the subwoofers will play back really low end effects, so you can specifically send specific things to that low frequency channel. And if you don't, it's not going to go through it. Versus in a concert system, you might send everything through a PA system like this, and it'll go to the subs and the regular PA speaker, no matter what. But each one handles its own frequency. So LFE is what that is. Then there was a company, Digital Theater Systems, which came in as a competitor, which is essentially the same setup, but its feed was from a CD player that was synchronized with the film projection playback, whereas Dolby was on the film stock itself in channels. And then Sony developed theirs, which was very similar. The biggest difference was across the front, instead of left, center, right for you guys, it was left, center, right. Had more playback across the front, so if you're handing things around, it'll have a little bit more even keel going dead center and then right. And then the 2000s brought around Dolby Atmos, which appeared in theaters around 2012 and then moved into the home around 2014. DTS moved in with their X, and then Auro 3D came into play as well. And Auro 3D had actually started a while before. And gaming was a big precursor for all of this, because they were able to do it within headphones as well, which is so all of those technologies in the last part here in the 2000s. The big thing is object-based mixing versus beds. And with that, yeah, I'm actually going to explain that more. So we're used to regular surround sound, which is 5.1 or 7.1. So we have 3 in the front, 2 in the rears. Home theater in Dolby ended up putting a rear channel in the center in the rear, which was 6.1 they were calling it. So it wasn't really in the theaters that way. It was really a home entertainment thing. And object-based mixing is basically, instead of in your surrounds where you can make a sound source come to any one of those speakers, and if you put it on the sides, it'll be a little bit in the front, a little bit in the back. But with object-based mixing and adding the upper channels, front and rear, you actually assign an object, which could be a sound effect. It could be some atmosphere. It's usually sound effects, though. where you're chasing it around. So if you say like a helicopter is the easiest way to explain it. If you're having a helicopter fly in from behind you, come over the audience and land in front, you can have it do that very evenly using a panner, and it would just come through those speakers, through the top ones and down through the front. So where the object base of that comes in is when you have these, I'm going to call 7.1, so it's 2 in the rear and 2 on the sides, which are mostly what the theaters you go to have, plus the 3 in the front. Now, the Atmos starts with 4 up top, so it's kind of 2 behind you and 2 in front. So if you wanted something like just above that speaker there, which isn't really going to be handled by the lower side surround or the top one directly, object-based mixing, it's all in software-based, and it uses software to take this sound object, the helicopter or whatever, and be able to place it in this space that you're in. But it's going to tell each one of the speakers in that area how much sound is going to come out of each of the speakers to actually get it to localize there. So you're hearing it in that position versus just sending it in between the side and the front. So you can send it, 50-50, it'll come out of both or a little bit more. But if you want to get height out of it, the only way to do that is when you bring in the height channels. And then you can specifically say, if you want it in between all of those, it'll just spit the sound out there because that's where you want it. And it's done it through software, through what's called Dolby Atmos rendering engine. Yeah, please do.
So if you were out in the field recording a helicopter, if you were near the helicopter, you would get one intense, strong sound. If you were away from the helicopter, you would get a different ambient. If you put this helicopter in this object-based thing, the recording is only one recording.
Yeah, so if you're recording mono, you have the single, even if you're in stereo, what you'll end up having is a Doppler effect for when it flies in and flies by or lands, right? But in addition to that, if you want to really capture a true immersive experience, then you would need a microphone. And it's actually a set of microphones that can record all at once. So it'll, there's 4, there's 8, there's now 10 point source microphones that'll record each space. So back in the day when you first did surround, you had to mathematically take 5 microphones, set them up for left, center, right, and then your rears, and they had to be in specific positions mathematically and measured out so you didn't have phase cancellation issues between those mics. And once that was set, you could set that up and then record however you wanted to, whatever was happening. And if you just play that track back, then you would get a sense of that space that you were in. So with the Atmos, they have to add in, it's basically, it's hard to do this. It's 4 mics that are specifically positioned. So one's capturing here, one's capturing down below, one's over here, and one's over here, but they're in an XY configuration and they're not having any phase issues. So you have to have a 4-track recorder, and what this gets into is called ambisonics. So once it's recorded in that format, then it has to be converted back down to our standard format. So it depends on if you want to capture the source that way or produce sound effects and do sound design and do it that way and have fly-ins and flying around and everything like that. So it really depends on how you want to do it. But they can integrate together. With Dolby, they can do up to 22.1 channels. And it really depends on how many channels you're going to have overhead. Typical bass is 7.1.4, so it's left, center, right surround, light, left side, right side, and then your tops front and left, and your backs front and left.
0.1 is for subwoofer?
0.1 is a subwoofer, yep. And the base of this actually, I say base because pretty much all of the studios that are doing Atmos mixing right now are at least 7.1.4 versus 7.1.2. If you see 0.2, it just means there's 2 in the front above you. And really where that started from was on the music side as well, because they didn't need full 7.4 off the bat. But because it's just evolving so quickly, 7.1.4 is becoming the norm to mix by. Bed channel versus object-based mixing. So the bed channel is essentially your standard 5.1 or your 7.1. And object-based mixing is what I mentioned before, where you have you're setting up a specific object to be able to be moved around anywhere in the space. So a bed, like if you think of music, you might not necessarily send music flying all around, but you might want to spread it out around all your surround speakers. And you might set it up so that most of it comes from the front, and then you have a little bit in the surrounds. And so it's just going to the bed of those channels versus the objects. And that might, it'll be easier to say when I pull up the software to see it. Home entertainment and theatrical versions is how Dolby started doing it. It was only in theatrical versions. They created the Dolby Atmos mastering suite, which can be a separate server, and then Dolby Atmos production suite. And really, the end of last year, actually springtime, I'd say in the summer. So they had the theater version, so if you wanted to mix in Dolby Atmos, you had to go to a Dolby certified theater that had the whole suite and have them do it. And then what they developed was a production suite so that you could pre-mix in your own space and have a general idea of how your mix is coming out. And then if you were going to do a theatrical release, then you'd take your pre-mix, go to a certified stage, and have it mixed that way. And how that helps is that you don't have to spend $7.50 an hour for the entire thing. Do all your pre-mixing first, then you go to a big stage and have them do it. And they do it with the mastering suite. The mastering suite runs off a separate server, whereas the production suite is now integrated with Steinberg Window, Avid Pro Tools, and actually just did it last month, 2 months ago. So you can have, you don't have to purchase a separate product, but it's already built in. So if you have Steinberg Window, it'll have the Atmos mixing capabilities in it already, and you don't have to buy the Dolby Atmos production suite, which runs about $300. And to compete, so Pro Tools put it in theirs as well. So it's integrated, so it can be all run on one computer, and you can use headphones to do it as well. You don't need a separate mastering server.
How does it work in headphones?
What's that?
How does it work in headphones?
Binaural. So you, instead of straight stereo, it algorithmically, I should say, changes how you hear things, so it can be perceived as being a little bit behind you and in front of you and overhead. Not as well as speakers will do,
right.
But you're allowed to. You can basically be on a plane and mix stuff, and then go back to your studio and smooth it at that point. Yeah, DTS, so digital theater systems, they have the X, which is same thing, object-based, up to 32 channels. Not on streaming. Dolby Atmos is on streaming now. Auro 3D is essentially the same thing as well. The base is 5.1.4, and they can move you up to 11. At the end, I do have a slide that shows 3D version of these where you can see the surround layer, the height layer, and then there's actually one other layer to get those 22 channels. And it can be very costly. And then it switched over into the home entertainment field, as I was saying before, with the binaural and the ambisonics. It's 2-channel with those in the headphone experience, but the way it plays back is really just, it's called RTF, head transport, shoot, RTF. I'll see it in here before. Which basically fools the brain, because at times that's whatever's coming out of that speaker hits this ear directly, and then other has to come around to this ear. So there's a time delay. So they play the time delays to be able to simulate what you're hearing. And a lot of manufacturers actually on the music side, anyways, for recording studios, is you can buy a plug-in software that goes into your software, and you can basically it's simulating what you would hear at Abbey Road or these other big studios to hear what it would theoretically sound like if you were mixing in those rooms. Yes, head-related transfer function.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
If you record with binaural sound, do you have to do any special adaptation if you decide you want to share it in a non-headphone experience using something like, one of these Ambo sound?
Yeah, because it's recorded in A and B formats, and it's just a conversion over. Basically everything can be down converted into stereo, and you won't miss anything.
Okay, so
And it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't change anything phase-wise, so nothing becomes out of phase with it.
So it's better to record binaurally, and you have more freedom.
Ideally, yeah, because then you can play with it in the software. And when I say software, so we're talking Avid Pro Tools, Steinberg, Nuendo, Logic Pro does this all now. Ableton Live can do this, so it's really hitting the music market as well. Studios are going back into their back catalogs and remixing stuff in Dolby Atmos because it's come into the people's homes so easily, and you can have a similar experience on headphones. The streaming services, Amazon Music, Tidal, and Spotify's not there yet. I forget the other one. There's one other service that you can get these formats in. Spatial music from Apple. It's the same precept as all of this. And there are some people like Hortense over here, who's one of our board members, and does a lot with theater, but in a very different way, incorporating a lot of different things and experimenting with technologies and sound. So how do people get that kind of an experience on headphones, silent rave, doing that kind of a thing. And people are doing it all over the place right now. So it's still really pushing in that direction. And like I said, a year ago, it was very costly to get in. You're still having to, the mastering suite's about $1,000, but it comes with 2 licenses of the production suite. Or you can get the production suite for $300. So I was looking at, in Pro Tools, you had to buy Pro Tools Ultimate, which is their high-end version, to be able to get this immersive mixing. Steinberg had it built in. Logic didn't have it yet. So you really had limited choices, and then Avid finally went over and made their lower version, their average standard version, integrate with it. And they did it in a way similar to Nuendo, where you didn't have to buy the extra pieces of software to be able to do it. And Logic is the same way. So really, Dolby's really getting their foot into integration with other. Was it something I said, fellas? My fellow projectionists. I know, right? So really, Dolby's really just trying to get a foothold in everywhere and make it so that it's not quad from the 70s, which went away, and things like that. Blu-ray, Super Audio CD. I went with the Blu-ray version. There we go. So as indie filmmakers, I assume everyone's filmmakers. Awesome. You guys screening stuff here? No? Okay. Well, welcome anyways. I work with a lot of independent filmmakers, and that's pretty much where I am as far as mixing goes. I don't have a big studio, so I'm not mixing anything major at this time anyways. So the way Dolby did it is they really wanted this to become more integrated with boutique studios and studios where the average people tend to go and have their stuff done. And they knew this was happening, and during the pandemic really shifted to make sure they got the market, because at the time it was really just theatrical releases. Once the pandemic happened, people had to take their studios home and mix at home. We have not a filmmaker, a sound mixer from Skywalker who had a film here after Antarctica was one that he mixed. And he came a couple years ago and we became friendly, so I talked to him a lot. And he was in a position where the same thing, COVID happened. They basically set up their mixers with rigs for home so they could mix at home because they still had to keep going. So they adapted that, and because smaller studios had to compete as well, I think that's where Dolby really said, if we just make these changes, we can get a lot more people integrated with it. So as far as post-production goes, for the most part, if you can do your pre-mixing at home or with a smaller studio, it's a lot more affordable. You can have it pretty much the way you want it as far as the mix goes. And then if you need to do a theatrical release, that whole pre-dub session that you did will transfer right over to a theatrical stage. So there shouldn't have to be a lot of changes in it depending on the room you mixed in. If it's a certified room, then it should transfer over really well. If it's not Dolby certified, which can be done, then it takes some time. You might have to make some more adjustments on the stage itself. And one of the other good features about Dolby Atmos is that you can actually do a stereo mix, a surround mix, and an immersive mix all at once. This is within their mastering suite render system engine, and mix those all at once, so you don't have to do separate ones. So if you have an immersive mix, you can fold it down, and it'll spit out a 5.1 or 7.1 or a stereo mix as well, which is very handy because for the studio side, that's a lot. And actually the client doesn't have to likely pay as much on the amount of time spent in the studio to do it. Distribution, this has changed a little bit, but it's Netflix is really the one accepting most of it. Amazon is doing it also. So everyone's getting into it, and there are so many studios now that have the setup, and it's not costing that much more than it would just to do a regular surround mix. So being able to get into it, unless you have a $1,500 budget, it's more within reach than people think. So it's a matter of really talking to your studios and finding out what their budget is able to do, what your budget is able to do for them. As I mentioned before, the software tools are Pro Tools, Ultimate, and now Studio, Steinberg Nuendo, and they've been doing it the last 5 years now. Ableton is in it, Logic is in it. Ableton Live is their product, Logic Pro. The encoders, Dolby Atmos Production Suite and the Mastering Suite, and DTS has their own. Hardware, is where it gets more costly because you need your 9 to 12 speakers. And then as far as the computers go, the Macs have always been one to have it all integrated. The Dolby Atmos rendering system, the renderer itself is actually a Windows-based, but the production suite can be on any of the platforms. There was a point in time where the Atmos production suite, you could only use, you'd have to buy it through Avid, but can be used as a plugin with other manufacturer software. And then audio interfaces, if you have the 12 channels, you have to have something that's going to have 12 outputs on it to be able to feed your speakers. And this is the other part that gets complex because you can have a little audio interface and plug in your left and right speakers and you have stereo. You would have to have 8 channels to be able to do 5.1 and 7.1. And those outputs from your DAW interface could go right to your speakers, and most of them have a volume control, so you can control the volume in that sense. You do still have to calibrate your system based on where the speakers are in relation to where you're sitting, based on distance. So you do have to do that regardless, and pretty much everyone mixes. The big stages mix at 85 decibels, so you'd have a sound pressure level meter where your head is, set that up, and run some pink noise from each speaker, and they should all be 85 dB at that position. And that's for if you're in a big theater. If you're in a smaller stage, home studio setup, then 78, 79 is really where people are putting the volume at. And the reason why they do those specific volumes is because when you go into a movie theater, everything is set to one volume, and that's what it plays back at. Theaters do have the ability to make things louder or softer, and there's always that war, but specs from the actual movie studio like Sony will come in that they expect the stuff to be played at X. So it plays back correctly in their suite. So with smaller productions, if you're set up to that 79 decibels and just leave it there, then, and you have a meter as well, and the meter for integrated reading, and I can get into that in a little bit. If you're at minus 23 decibels on your integrative loudness meter, then you're going to have something that translates pretty well across multiple venues. So no matter where you go, if the volume is set where you want it, you're going to have consistency across. Like if you look at Woods Hole here, we have 5 different venues. If you play your show back at each one of them, something's probably going to be a little different at each one. So that's why THX came in to really have it so that you wouldn't have a big variation in stuff. So with the audio interfaces, another thing is Dante, which is software-based, but it's from a company that's in Australia, and it is computer network-based. So if you think of your Cat5 cable that you plug in for your internet and stuff at home, and all that information really is only going over 2 pairs of the 4 pairs in that wire. So Dante works on those cables. There's Dante and there's another one called ABB, but Dante is really in this space. And Dante allows you to transfer a lot of channels. So if you think of a 24-channel analog mixing board, and then you're sending 2 channels out, the simple Cat5 cable will transfer 64 plus channels of the same thing, lightning speed. And a lot of that stuff is run in stadiums for concerts and stuff too. So they're really trying to integrate with those products that have Dante enabled, so it's easier than having big analog snakes and wires going between the stuff. Makes sense? Doing okay? Then there's software plugins. You don't need all these. These are companies that produce stuff The second one down there, New Gen, is Halo is their product, which does will up and down mix from stereo to 5.1 or 7.1 and even Atmos now. And it comes out pretty good. So if you don't want to mix, if you have a stereo and you don't have a budget, you can have your mixer try doing that and see how it comes out. Blue Ripple Audio is one that gets into the virtual reality space and augmented reality for ambisonics. And again, we talked about the software encoders of the Dolby Atmos pieces. So where are we today? As I mentioned before, it's really helps the indie filmmakers consider it at least. You know, it gets expensive, even from stereo and 5.1, and everyone has low budgets, and many filmmakers and up and coming ones don't have a budget and they do it all themselves. But they can still really find a place that can cater in a boutique situation where it's a smaller space. They don't have a lot of overhead like studios do, so they can actually really consider it. And like I said, the manufacturers are making it easier for the studio owners that have to invest a lot of money in setting up this kind of system. So the trade-off really is they do that investment, but it also makes it so that they don't have to charge as much for indie filmmakers to come in and make their project what they want to make it if they want to go that route. And then there's also a lot of, obviously, filmmakers aren't all doing theatrical releases. Some are going straight to Netflix or Prime and stuff like that, or smaller streaming places. So that, again, it's not a big expense, or not as big as an expense to do it as a theatrical release. Same with the festival circuits as well. But most of the festivals, we're lucky we have Redfield here, which is a full surround system, and I think Clap. Is Clap full? Is it surround?
Not sure.
I don't remember now. We had Redfield modified. We had some donors come in and actually make it into a full 5.1 system in there. Actually, sorry, 7.1 system in there, which is nice, and not every festival has that. So, all right. So this slide here gives you a little bit of an idea of where placements can be. The one on your right is Oro 3D, and that one implements a lot more speakers. And they essentially take what we would consider a 5.1 surround or 7.1 surround, or even 9, and they take that layer and just raise it up a little bit higher, so that's a whole nother layer. And then they add in 4 actual overheads from that. So they have a lot. And again, it's for the big theaters and big budgets, stuff like that, or people that want to get into experimental mixing with theatrical, not theatrical, but theater alternative type mediums of projects. Dolby Atmos keeps it at their 7.1, and when you see all the blue ones in the Dolby Atmos there, that's the lower layer, and what happens is you might see perhaps 5 speakers on each side of the room, and then you might see 5 behind you on each side, so it looks like there's maybe 20 speakers altogether. But of those speakers, probably 3 or 4 on the sides handle the side, and then the rest in the back handle the back. So your left rear is actually a combination of 4 speakers. Your sides is a combination of 4 speakers and such. And same with over top. The top can actually have discrete that many channels going across, so it's not 7.1.4 at that point. You might be looking at 7.1.8. The Oro 3D is there. DTX, again, is very similar to the other ones. Dolby's specific on how they play theirs back through film stock. and or DCP, so it's built all right in. Same with DTS, but DTS used to be on a separate CD that you would send and they would sync up with their playback. Makes sense? Yeah, any questions at all? I'm sure there's like 100 because I keep coming up with them myself. You know, because it's all really new. Still new, I should say.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I do independent films.
Yep.
And radio production. I'm not interested in the big theater 20
Oh.
thing. But what I'm curious about is, like, I'm finishing a film now that just has everything. There's like interviews, classroom. It's going to have music and narrator.
Mm-hmm.
My plan is always just make the stereo. So how far should I be thinking?
That depends on how far you want to take it. But you mentioned podcasts. So there's actually podcasts now that are actually getting into doing full immersion. So if you play back through a home theater system, you can experience it that way. Or even if you're on headphones, you'll get a binaural.
Right. Like, for instance, when I have the music produced for the film, should we be thinking about it in more than stereo?
It really depends on how you want your project to come across, because it could still be in stereo. One of the other things to keep in mind is with objects, you could fill every speaker with everything, right? But it's really intended to keep localization. So if you have, especially with like, if you think of dialogue in films, we used to have stereo in films, you lose the dialogue if the music's too high. And then we had a center channel, so we put all the dialogue in the center channel and music on the sides. Now you can hear the dialogue much better, and you can still spread it off to the sides a little bit. So when you introduce all these channels, it's really keeping in mind space, what you want people to be enveloped in, and also not losing aspects that you're introducing, such as music or sound effects, being able to hear them correctly without having to push them too loud or too soft. You know, if you look at a film score, if you think of a song, when it's played back, it might be loud the whole way through. It might be soft the whole way through. It might have dynamics. When we're doing film scores, they usually do have dynamics to get out of the way and make room for other stuff. So it's the same exact principle, and it really depends on how much you want to spread it out. So if this project is something where you really want to immerse people in, then yeah, I would probably spread it out a bit. And spreading it out could be still coming out of the left and right fronts, I should do it this way. And then just introducing a little bit in the back, perhaps as reverb, so like you're in a hall. When it first started happening, there was a guy in Belgium who came to an organization called Audio Engineering Society, which is a big organization, and they set a lot of standards. And so he was invited, and he was one of the first to really experiment with music with surround. And he put an entire first verse in the center channel. And everyone was like, what? What are you doing? And then when the chorus hit, it was just everywhere. And it changes everything, because it changes your perspective as to what you're thinking or experiencing. And once it spills out, it's really immense. It's massive. And everyone's like, holy cow, I want to do that. How'd you do that? You know, so it really spreads the gamut. And because the software companies and manufacturers have made it easier for entry into the field, then why not experiment and see where it goes with it. Now, if you're playing that stuff back, if you don't have places that can play that kind of a thing, that's another trade-off, where you might take the full encompassing thing and downmix it into stereo or just straight surround, depending on what theater you're going to play back in, if it's in a theater. Because again, not everyone has it. If this was a workshop where I had 2 hours to set up and we're going to spend 3 hours in it, then I probably would have brought the rig in and set the whole thing up so you can play around with it. What's that?
Next year.
Right? I know. With some theatrical stuff. Yeah, because in augmented reality is another place in virtual reality where the sound is really all-encompassing and you can really transform where people are, you know, which makes it fun, I think. Let me just see if this is working. So rather than, so I've remoted into my home computer because I couldn't install. And essentially what I did was, if we look at this dialogue one, so this is a folder which would theoretically have all your dialogue in, each track. And I just have a single track of it here. The dialogue tracks, the sound effect tracks, music, ambience, Foley, all come down into these group mixes. So they're all sub-mixes of each of those. And the reason why I do that is you can control dialogue better. I can put plugins on the inserts for subgroups so I can really control everything in one shot more easily. I don't have to worry about what the sound effects are doing, or the Foley or the music. And those ones are then sent to currently a bed. So again, what the bed is your standard 5.1 or 7.1. So it's getting sent to all those depending on how you pan it. So if I had the dialogue and I panned it anywhere within the surround field, it would go to whatever speakers I tell it to go to, and you can automate that, obviously. Or you can automate that, it might not be obvious. So what I have is music and dialogue. And can I get over there? No.
Is that the window?
Yeah. I'm just trying to see how to get through. No. Oh, it's under this bar here. That's what's going on. And what I do is I tend to have, I have all my sub-mixes over on the right-hand side, and then my stereo, my outputs from there. So it's feeding a bed right now, and it's the dialogue is in the center channel. And let me show you, let me slide back over here. If we go to the dialogue, DX1. So I have it only going to the center channel. I can mouse it over, I can go into the left channel only. If you look at the right-hand side, you can see the meter change depending on where I put it. And I can slide it in the backs. I can put it right in the middle, and it'll go across each channel, theoretically the same, depending on where you put it. You can get it averaging into there. So I'm really telling it where to go on that particular bed. And, sorry, I didn't mean to close that. So you can have, I don't know, how, it might not be easy to see. Yeah. So in the spot here is where you can choose bed mode versus object mode. And you can actually, what the bed is, you can do multiple beds. So you could have one bed dedicated to the music, one bed dedicated to dialogue, one to Foley or ambience. I should say it's really, you'd probably divide it up between music and ambience, stuff that goes full encompassing in the surround, and have it directed only to those places so you can really keep them separate. And if you do it that way, if you need to EQ the music a different way or introduce some plug-in to add an effect to ambience, you're not going to get in the way of the music or the other ones from that standpoint. And then when we look at the bed, the stereo, and the Atmos output. So let's just go on there. I want to pull this up. I don't remember where it is. Project. Huh, video screen issues at home. Oh, there it was. Shut this for a sec. So this is the built-in aspect of Dolby Atmos in Nuendo. Logic would have this. Pro Tools has this now where you can see here this drop down, if you can read it, allows you to connect to the renderer for Dolby Atmos, which is one that's integrated with the software product, Nuendo. Or you can connect it to an external version of the renderer, which would be its own server. When you do that, that's for the more high-end stuff, where if you have a lot of objects, and you can have up to 128 objects, you're not really going to get the performance out of a laptop or a smaller computer to handle that much automation, because not only is it the objects, but you might have automated plugins and all your faders just automating. So it's going to be too much for the computer to handle. So that's why they have it in an external box. So the software itself, again, is 1,000, and then the server itself is probably going to be 3,500 to 5,000, depending on, because Dolby wants you to buy a licensed version of it, which is fine. But the more to the point of this is you can actually do it within your system. And I set up this Atmos bed A, and then just 3 separate objects, one from each input that I have track. So if you think of all your dialogue tracks, all your sound effects tracks, each one of those tracks, you could set that particular track up to be an object. So if you wanted your helicopter, you could have that on its own track, and that's going to be an object. And the key to this really is this unit here, which is your renderer for Dolby Atmos. And why don't we grayed out? Channel configurations. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, my guess here, welcome to my world of troubleshooting. You spend half of your time doing this, unfortunately. My guess is it's the buffer size, which they are requiring 512. In case you don't know quickly what a buffer size is you're feeding information into somewhere, and there's a buffer, so it evenly spits it out all evenly all the time. So if there's a lot of information coming in, nothing changes on the recording side. So if you're recording music, for example, digital age, if you're doing it digitally, if you have a buffer size of 500 to 1,000 milliseconds, you're going to hear a delay between what you're singing along to or playing along to. So you want to have a really small buffer size so it's almost in real time. But because this is usually mixing, you usually don't need it like that, so they want a bigger buffer. So evidently, I'm having an issue with buffer size. So let me see if I can make this a little bigger, because what I can still point out to you, let me hit play. Play. All right, it is hard to see, my apologies. So you see a bunch of dots over on this side. This window over here is actually your pan screen, like we saw before, and it'll show you objects that are moving around with little dots. So all these dots over here represent your beds in your music. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the first 8, we'll call it, would be your 7.1 bed. So all of these would be lighting green if you were sending your music to that bed, bed A. Bed B might be the next 8 dots. And what they do is when you're playing back, it's actually flashing green to let you know something is occurring on that channel or object or bed. When you have individual ones, so it looks, let me get that out of the way. Second row down, right in this area, there's 4. Looks like there's 4 that are sticking out a little bit. So those are individual objects. So you can have, Dolby made it so you can have up to 128 of these, depending on how many beds you have. So if you have 2 beds, you subtract 16 dots from that, and then the rest you can make individual objects. And it's just shows you what's active, if there's something active on any of those channels at given points in time. And on the right-hand side, you would see all that. You know what? Let's just do this. 2 bits. Well, this is coming up. One of the other things aside from the film side of things, is getting into it on the music side, because I do work with musicians. And there's a blues record I did. Oh, musicians. So I do, I work in studio and live, as you know. So there's a blues record that I had worked on a year ago that we had finished up at the end of 2020. And that one I'm working on actually a couple songs for Dolby Atmos, because we'll probably end up doing that one as an Atmos record itself, because you can get it on all these other platforms. I don't have to go to a theatrical stage to render and mix it. I can mix it, and then Avid now has a system. They have their own Spotify Play, if you will, Apple Music. So if you sign up for them, however much it is a year, you can upload directly Atmos mixes to them, and people can download it and listen to it from their service as well. I'm going to try and get this to come up, just so you can see it in action if you can on this network. It might be too slow. Any questions while I'm waiting for this to load? Thoughts, concerns, weather, hot? Any good films you guys have seen? Have you guys been attending any of the films this week? Yeah? Anything sticking out? Favorites?
Medicine and Miracles.
I haven't seen that one yet, actually. I saw Sweet Disaster last night. Get to it, that was good. It's fun. It does a lot of this. It's a romantic comedy kind of a thing, but it has some not unusual, but a little bit animation to it in different ways. And we always have good documentaries.
Yes.
I saw Free Rent.
What's that? Free Renty. Yeah. That was a good one. After Antarctica, and what was the one with Exposure. Yeah, that was great.
Saw a decent home last night too.
Hmm.
They had a panel of housing experts, and it was about kind of trailer park homes and becoming park owners, and a bunch of folks there who had worked in legislation to get that room,
Wow.
including State Senator Pacheco. He's from Plymouth.
Oh,
Nobody knows who he is, but
yeah.
that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I was thinking of those expeditions, and they look interesting, but I don't think I would want to partake. I might want to do a little bit of it, but
Get in the flow.
this
What do you think? I mean, if say
I don't think it's going to want to load.
you're thinking about this as a future way to work in the pre-production part of the workflow, what is
Yeah.
it that you'll look back on when you're sitting in a room with your sound editor and say, should have taken that into account when I was planning for this? I mean, is it kind of a layer that you can put on afterwards where you say,
Yeah.
okay, let's make it immersive by now going back and
Yeah,
or I guess what would you need to think about on the very front end?
On the very front end is really what you want your project to get across to your viewers.
Yeah.
How
successfully it will be. Like
well, not success, but as a project, as a storyline, what does it need? Does it really need to give people a different kind of experience?
Yeah.
Where is it going to play?
Yeah.
Is it going to be just film festivals and then go to streaming? It still works. It just depends on what you're going to do. I've worked. Taiki and I have done, I don't know how many films with a mutual friend, and every time I always have to ask myself, will it work better to have a surround mix? Should we even try Atmos? But most of the time where it plays back is at festivals or smaller places, and they're very dialogue driven. There's a couple, there's one that I just did, finished up this week, New York Minute. I'll probably pop that over to surround. I don't know if Atmos. I might just play with it in Atmos, but it's a cop movie, but it's a couple of locations. One's right on Brooklyn River, Hudson River. Another one's at Coney Island. So do I want to give people more of an experience in there? Not that it's going to change the storyline of the film, and really it's the storyline. And, even if you get through the film, you're like, it could really use this here. Is it worth it to do that at that point? And anything that's going to be not effects heavy, but like he was talking about, do you record it that way in the field first and bring it in to have the full effect, or do we just sweeten it in the studio, Yes.
So your primary directive in the field is getting good audio with your actors.
Yeah.
What are you thinking of in terms of microphone placement to get adjuncting sound?
Well, not usually, every time I go in the field, if I'm doing location sound for dialogue, I'm always going to get atmosphere stuff in the moment. So whatever's happening. So you always need your room tone, because the editor is going to need to cut against it, or I'm going to need to cut against it later. And if it's in a busy place where you want to have, a real affect of what is happening, then I would probably consider renting a mic if I didn't have it, and depending on which version of mic you use, because some of them, again, could be a 4-channel one, it could be an 8-channel one. People that do 360 videos go for those mics because it's not a tree, it's easier to hide. You put it, sometimes underneath, upside down, because you can actually flip the playback so it's right side up. Not in the mic itself, but in the software. So it's out of the way. So if you do have the 360, you're not really gonna see it there versus a big tree like would be the size of the fan. Up there, and depending on the type of mic you use, some are small and some are a little bit bigger. They have smaller ones also. But again, the smaller ones, the good ones, are pretty expensive, so that's why you get into trying to rent the stuff on occasion, unless you're doing it a lot. And then the recorder, There's recorders now that have the ambisonics inside of it, so you can set it up and have, you know, a 4-channel recorder. Sound Devices does it. Fostex, I think Zoom's new one does it as well. So you can do the multi-channel in that and use one of these microphones, and it'll record it in the proper format. Again, it's format based because it's not just a simple XY. XY is when your capsules are in line with each other. So the front of the capsule in both locations are right over each other, so there's no phase. Otherwise, you have to do a 120 this way, which gives you a little wider stereo spread. But when you start introducing multiple microphones, then you have this, and then you got to get your center capsule right above or right below, so it's time delayed, so there's no delay between when that sound source hits it. It's going to hit all 3 capsules at the same time. So you'd have your stereo, and then your center one would be for your center channel. Or you can do a bi-directional one if you want to pick up stuff behind you at the same time as the front. But that would only be on one channel, so it gets pretty involved. So you want to have someone that knows how to do it, or experiment with it, and learn how to do it yourself. So yeah, yeah. I think this is not letting me back in. We might not be getting back in. All right. Any other questions? I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add. Option is disabled by admin. Disabled by my admin? Who's my admin to contact? All right. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to add in for you. Yes. So my email address. My real name is Garrett. Jay is my nickname. My address is Garrett, Garrett, audio @hotmail. And if you type in Gmail, it doesn't matter because I get that too. So if you have any questions later after the fact, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to send this to you guys if you want a copy of the.
2 R's and 2 T's in your audio?
There are, yep. Yes. It's fun, it's a lot. But they're making it easier for independent filmmakers to be able to do it. And they know that too, because the more people they can get using their software, the better off they'll be. So it still seems like a standard format, a format that's going to stick around for a while and become standardized. I don't think it's going away. I went to Berklee College of Music. They happened to buy a big studio in New York City called Power Station, which is one of the big original recording studios in New York and in the US. That was being sold, so they bought it and went in with the city of New York. So now it's Berklee NYC. But what they did is they kept the original studios because they're so unique. It's called, if you look up Berklee NYC, you'll see what they look like. But high ceilings, and they have, if you look behind you, you can see the vertical slats of wood. It's that kind of concept where they basically did a dome, burlapped it, and then took slats of pine and just put them on there, and it's one of the best sounding rooms in the world next to like Abbey Road. It's like Bruce Springsteen and all the big heavyweights. And I don't know if you remember a band called Chic back in the 70s, 80s, The Freak. Look them up. You'll know their stuff once you hear it. You might not know though. But anyways, my point is they They kept the whole studio the same, but they tore out the equipment, put it in storage, and ran wire in the whole place. So now it's all full immersive, 360 video content. So they do a master's program in there now. And they, New York City, it's in Hell's Kitchen area. Berkeley, NYC. Yeah, the original studio was called Power Station.
Are they affiliated with UC Berkeley?
No, this is Berkeley College of Music in Boston. Yeah, sorry, I forgot the California people might. L-E-E, not L-E-Y. But it's really, really cool what they're doing. And yeah, I think there's going to be more people do it. And I work with a public access station down in Dennis. We're going to start doing more experimentation with virtual reality and Unreal Engine and all the wacky stuff, because it's fun.
It's also the future. So how does this whole meta promise
Yeah.
play into this?
Well, the metadata is actually the Dolby Atmos renderer. So it's all metadata information, based on their algorithms to be able to know where to put stuff. And you can embed all your film's information into it, just like if you're releasing a song. The last stage of doing a song is you're doing the mastering process, where you have the final mix, and then you're just going to tweak it with whatever tweaks it needs. Another thing I do is, but you put in metadata information in your song. So there's a place where you put your code to be able to get paid for every time it's streamed somewhere, because there's collection agencies that keep track of all that. So that's how you get royalties out of it. Your UPC code, name of the artist, the band, the song, whoever was involved in it, you can really load it up. So when you're playing it back in the car, anywhere that has the ability to pull in that data, because it's actually all coming from a Grace Note and another database. I'm blanking on the name of it. But it's just pulling all that metadata down. And it, when was it? It might be 5+ years ago. If you're ever worked with Adobe Premiere and After Effects, what they started to do was they partnered with a transcription software, so you could render out your dialogue. It would create a transcript. Early days, it wasn't so hot. You'd have to do a lot of editing. But all the words would be at specific spots in the storyline, right? So that was metadata. So you could take that metadata, render out your video, and you were supposed to be able to put it on, like, say, YouTube or Vimeo or somewhere like that, and actually pinpoint in your production specific tags based on whatever was in there on the transcription. And it would go right to there. Now, it died out a little bit. People didn't get into it as much, I don't think. But one of the issues was YouTube, when you put your stuff on there, it essentially strips your metadata out. So that's why you enter in all your information after you upload your video. So it wasn't working so much with YouTube. But I haven't done it in so many years to see if it actually still works. But they did integrated it with After Effects as well. But the translator has gotten a little bit better as well. Right? It's just, yeah, I'm not a software engineer. I twiddle knobs, faders. Yeah.
Is this the kind of sound that's being used in like the Oculus and that sort of like the?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all, because it's within that software, it's all encoded already. So you can hear it as binaural, and ambisonics, and Dolby Atmos as well, actually, because it's going to come through them. I think it's just a matter of time before the other services integrate it. I think they are working on integrating it. Some want to be first. Tidal was able to do it because their streaming service is high resolution, where your stuff is always going to be 24-bit 48K or 96K, so it's always going to be a high resolution format, whereas Spotify is not. Your high end on Spotify is 320 kbs MP3 still. So to be able to convert that over and translate it, yeah. Yeah.
You think in 25 years it'll be standard such that if you don't hear that sort of immersive sound in the theater setting, you feel it's like a hollow experience?
Yes.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. I won't go 25 years out. I would say 5.
Okay.
Even because what's going to happen is, well, I'm not going to say what's going to happen. What I think potentially could happen
Predict it.
is even based on through the pandemic, when people figured out how to do it at home. They always could, but then with this, they're forced into learning how to. But you're not going to get the same experience unless you have the willingness and capacity to spend the money and do it at your leisure. 25 years down the road,
All right. I guess we'll just.
I don't know if it's going to be a chip in the head and you're going to just hear it, Yes.
So if you, let's say you submit a film to like Amazon Films or
Yep.
Netflix, et cetera, for the consumer streaming at home, do they, let's just say like, for example, I just have like, plain old TV, flat screen TV with whatever onboard sound, speakers. When I hit the pay button and start streaming, is there something on the back end that knows that like I don't have 7 point whatever, so it's not gonna, is it gonna give me a stereo mix, is it give me a mono?
There's a couple of ways it does it.
Like a weird sort of, is it gonna try
It's not going to split. It's going to do one or the other. It won't get confused. So what they do is they spit out a digital stream anyways. So are you familiar with Sonos? So other sound bars, they have the whole thing built in. Your immersion does not need to have 17 speakers in your house. It can come from the sound bar. And the way they're doing it is they're bouncing stuff around off your ceiling and things like that. And the way to get that is, even on the back of your cable boxes, is an optical output, which is your digital feed. And TVs actually have that as well, where it's going to spit out, you can either do, it's going to end up going the byway, I think, a little bit because of HDMI, and has it already built in, has the audio built into it. But that's going to go into whatever box you put it into, and it can convert that out. So your boxes will have Dolby decoders in them, not encoders. They have the decoders, and they will play it back as the way it was supposed to be played back. And that's been happening that way for quite a while now, actually. But it's a matter of taking it out of, if you're using a smart TV and you're just getting it directly from the TV, that usually has an optical output, and you would spit that out into a home theater receiver, which has all your decoding stuff. So you need to go into a box that has the decoding capability in it already. Yeah, and it's, it's a little, the home theater is good because it gets lay people, anyone else that just wants to experience it, involved. And usually what they're doing is they're, a lot of times for the Atmos stuff, they might have a rear speaker. If it's a tower speaker, they might have an adapter, not an adapter, literally a smaller box that sits on top of the speaker, and it's just pointing up to your ceiling, and it's bouncing it back down. So it's not a direct like you would in a theater. So you get the experience, but it's not the same exact experience. And if you go to a trade show like AES, I don't know, if you're ever in New York City, it's always, sometimes it's every other year, but it's in October. And they have so many of these setups because the big speaker manufacturers will come in and set up 200 grand worth of speakers. And Audio Engineering Society, AES, every industry has their own, and that's what the sound one is. And they're the ones that really spearhead all the technology, all the scientists at them. And then some of us just go for the jobs we do.